Well, hi there. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is actually talking about a simulation that we do in class in microeconomics involving paper chains. And because if you weren't here or you weren't able to be here during that time, it does teach us some basic ideas that we're going to be using actually throughout this unit. So I made this video so that I could kind of explain what's happening in this particular simulation and give you some data that we can work with later. So the very first thing that I explained when we run the simulation that you should know is we're going to have 4 different companies in the class. And really that just is like 4 different groups who each have a variety of different folks. And what they're going to do is record data down here. And what I had students do is that in every round, they produce paper chains. And there's some instructions about the basic ideas of the paper chains. They use a stapler, scissors, and a set of desks in order to make a series of links together. And I put some rules on here, no stockpiling, one worker can't cut more than one at a time, blah, 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 blah. But the big idea here is that every single round of play, another student is hired as a worker. And so for the first round, there's only 1 worker. And for the second round, there's 2 workers. For the third round, there's 3 workers. And then what we do is we try to see how many more links can we make every time. But there's a catch. I don't give more pieces of scissors. I don't give more staplers. I do give you as many staples and paper as you want, but you have some what we call fixed inputs. So one of the learning outcomes from this is to understand that there are variable inputs. That's the labor, the number of students that are used. And then there's some fixed inputs. That's the scissors and the stapler that are used to make the particular product. And what we find is when we wrote down with each number of workers that we had, we wrote down the total product, the number of links in the chain that they were able to make. And for 0 workers, obviously they didn't make any chains, but for 1 worker, they made 6. And again, this data is actually from a group of students from a few years ago, but it would still work. And it's probably pretty close actually to what the data that we ended up with was. The first worker made 6, the second worker made 14 along with the first worker. So understand that where this says Q labor 2, that's actually the 2 workers combined. They produced a chain with 14 links. When they hired a third worker, the link chain ended up being 20. And again, they start from 0 every single time is how these are made. And so the most that they could make was 29 links with 6 students. But you can see that they very rapidly increased the number that they were able to produce. And then there was kind of some diminishing amounts that they were able to get. And it had nothing to do with the quality of worker number 4 or 5 or 6. That it wasn't that they were bad workers. In fact, they were probably just as good at making paper chains as the first few workers. But what was happening, what we learned as we were kind of working through these and noticing that total product was kind of increasing and then it started to increase at a decreasing rate, was that was because initially the workers are specializing. We found that when they moved to the second worker, they got actually more. If you notice, they got 8 links from that second worker and they only got 6 from the first one. And that's because when they had 2 workers, one worker focused on cutting the paper and the other worker focused on stapling the chains. When they had 3 workers, they had 1 worker who was kind of folding the paper and like circling it, another worker that was doing scissors, and another worker that was doing stapling it together. And when they got the 4th worker, they were able to get a little bit more, but you notice that it actually got lessened. Just as going from 2 to 3, it got lessened. So what we'd say here is that there's this kind of change in between these, the 0 to 6, 6 to 14, 14 to 20, 20 to 25. And that kind of rate of change starts to slow down. The initial increase happens because of what we call specialization. That's the fancy word for you do the scissors part, I'll do the stapling part. But the slowing down happens because of something we're going to call diminishing marginal returns. And that's because, frankly, you keep adding workers, but you don't have enough scissors and staples or staplers, then you're not really going to be able to continue to have that specialization. They're going to get diminishing additional returns whenever they hire an additional worker. And that's just because there's a fixed number of the stapler and the scissors involved. So hopefully this helps you kind of make sense a little bit of our data table. We're going to come back and actually fill in more sections of this data table in later videos, but I hope this helps you, and I'll see you next time.